Hello everyone, my name is Peter Wolff and thank you for joining in today to the Wolff College of Coffee's weekly vlog. Today we're going to be talking about some books. So I suppose some books I would be recommending that are focusing specifically on just the roasting side of coffee. In a later vlog I will be talking about coffees that deal with understanding more about the green coffee. So 4 books today that we'll be starting with, and the first one that I'd like to talk about is this particular book here right in front of me, and this is the Coffee Roasting Foundation book. It was written by a gentleman called Morten Munchau from Denmark and the London Coffee School. And he has a business called Coffee Mind. And this book here is something I would be definitely recommending for those of you who are just starting to sort of commence looking at roasting. It's a fairly introductory book, and it's a really sort of easy to understand in terms of the concepts. Some of the key concepts that they'll be covering is looking at sort of the heating of the coffee, the drying of the coffee, pyrolysis, looking at sugar browning as well, talking about the different types of heat transfer that happens with the coffee, looking at how time affects flavour inside the roaster. Morten also does cover as well looking at what happens if there's a fire inside the roaster and how one deals with that. It's a really awesome book, really very simple concepts to understand, and really something I would be recommending that you get in terms of entry level. I think once you've gone through this, you kind of move up to the next level, and for those of you that haven't seen it, obviously this is the Coffee Roaster's Companion, written by a gentleman called Scott Rao, and those of you and those that who are avid readers of this particular philosophy, we like to call Raoists. But this book really takes the basics of what we mentioned before and really starts to expand out the knowledge and the key concepts in more detail. What this book particularly covers in greater depth is particularly green coffee chemistry. It starts to discuss obviously processing methods of green coffee, the storage of green coffee. It talks about coffee chemistry. It talks about what happens in terms of the progression of the coffee during the roast. We look at also, he looks at production roasting, which I think is fairly interesting to talk about, the day-to-days of actually producing and replicating batch after batch after batch. He touches on also sample roasting and cupping. So I think this particular book is for those of you that have, you've had some entry-level sort of training on the roast, you've spent a little bit of time, but you're just wanting to learn that a little bit more. Definitely worth considering this as being something that you can take something out of. There is another book that sort of sits next to that, and this is Robert Hoose's book, which is Modulating the Flavour of Coffee. So Rob takes a slightly different kind of approach on his sort of book, and that he wants you to start thinking about sort of particularly sort of acid development in coffee, the flavour of coffee, and understanding that as a coffee roaster you have the abilities to literally choose the outcome of the coffee in terms of its acid experience, its sugar experience or its sweetness, its body or its molecular weight of the coffee, through looking at understanding particularly the Maillard reaction and how we spend time in and out of that, and how that affects obviously the molecular weight of the coffee and how that transfers to the perception of body, talking about the degrees of caramelization and how that sort of sweetness also affects the perception of coffee as well. So Rob takes a very different sort of approach to Scott. Both have very interesting sort of pathways, and I can see both gentlemen's point of view, and I think from that there's definitely something to be learnt from that. So Robert's book is certainly something to be looking at. And then finally a new book that's just come out. It's been brought out by the guys from Roast magazine, called The Book of Roast. It's a fairly chunky looking book, and really what it is, it's really looking at sort of everything from green coffee to writing a business plan to open up a specialty coffee business. And this is really, I guess, a summary or a consolidation of all of the contributing authors over the many years within sort of the Roast magazine's sort of monthly subscription that comes out. And so it sort of takes you through all of the key authors specific items of interest. So Coffee Chemistry by Jose Rivera is there. Willem Boots in there talking about specifically roasting as well. There's numerous authors in it. It's a very extensive book. It's something I've only just recently received in the mail, and have spent really the last couple of weeks just sort of going over it and re-going over it. And you know, it's very, very extensive, and there really is something for everyone in it. And I think definitely a book that you would have to put on the must-buy list. So that would be my 4 recommendations for books that would cover specifically just the roasting side, and they can be purchased, you know, through all sort of good online booksellers. But anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. Again, for the Wolff College of Coffee, enjoy your reading.